They thought we were weak because we asked for peace. They mistook our diplomacy for cowardice, our restraint for inability. For 3 centuries, humanity had bent the knee, followed the rules, and played the civilized game set by the Galactic Council. We traded our weapons for words, our warships for welfare programs, our military might for moral high ground. But there's something the Council never understood about humans, something written in our DNA, carved into our bones by millions of years of evolution, and tempered in the fires of countless wars on a world that tried to kill us every single day. We are the descendants of apex predators who climbed down from trees and decided the entire planet belonged to them. We are the children of warriors who looked at the vast, hostile universe and said, "Not today." We are the inheritors of a species that turned a death world into a garden, then reached for the stars with bloodied hands and unbreakable will. The Council was about to learn why humanity had been the only species to conquer their homeworld completely before reaching space. They were about to discover why Earth's history books were written in blood and fire. They were about to understand why, when humans finally stopped talking and started fighting, entire civilizations learned to pray to gods they didn't believe in. The line had been crossed. The treaties were void. The restraints were off. And humanity was about to remind the galaxy why they should have left the sleeping predator alone. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood in the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, her hands clasped behind her back as she watched the holographic display showing the smoking ruins of New Geneva Colony. 300,000 souls, men, women, children, reduced to ash and shadow in the span of 6 hours. The attack had been surgical, efficient, and absolutely merciless. Around her, the council members sat in their elevated seats, their various alien forms creating a rainbow of scales, fur, and exotic flesh tones. Some floated in gravity-nullified chambers filled with methane. Others perched on crystalline structures that hummed with energy. All of them watched her with the cold indifference that had become humanity's constant companion over the past 3 centuries. "The unfortunate incident at New Geneva," spoke Councillor Vexhai, his serpentine form coiling around his speaking perch, "was regrettable but necessary. The human colony had violated 17 separate environmental protection codes, 6 resource extraction limitations, and 3 expansion restrictions." His forked tongue flicked out as he continued, "The Corvin cleansing fleet acted within the authority granted by Emergency Resolution 4471. Sarah's jaw clenched. Emergency Resolution 4471 passed just 2 days ago in a closed session while humanity's representatives were conveniently delayed by technical difficulties with their transport vessels. She had arrived to find the resolution already in effect, authorizing immediate corrective action against any human settlement deemed in violation of council law. "Corrective action," she repeated, her voice steady despite the rage burning in her chest. "Is that what we're calling genocide now?" A ripple of what might have been laughter passed through the chamber. Councillor Morthak, a crystalline being whose thoughts manifested as colored light patterns across his faceted surface, pulsed a disdainful yellow. "Genocide implies the destruction of a species, human. This was merely population adjustment. 300,000 individuals out of your species' 47 billion. Hardly significant." The casual dismissal hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had known most of the colonists personally. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, who had spent her life developing new agricultural techniques to feed the galaxy's hungry worlds. Captain James O'Connor, a war veteran who had turned to peaceful terraforming after humanity's weapons were banned. Children like 7-year-old Maria Santos, who had sent Sarah a hand-drawn picture of her new home just last month. Those people had families, Sarah said, stepping forward. They had hopes, dreams, contributions to make to the galaxy. They were vermin," interrupted Councillor Zethlar, his insectoid mandibles clicking with amusement. "Humans are a plague species. You multiply without restraint, consume resources without regard for others, and spread your primitive culture like a disease. The only reason this council tolerates your presence is because your manual labor is adequate." Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had heard the whispers, of course. The quiet conversations that stopped when humans entered rooms. The way other species' children were taught to avoid human colonies. The gradual reduction of humanity's voice in council affairs, from equal partners to barely tolerated servants. But, to hear it spoken so plainly, so casually, in the chamber where humanity had once held hope for a peaceful future among the stars. "I see," she said quietly. "And, what of the Terran Accords? The treaties guaranteeing humanity's right to colonization and self-determination?" Counselor Vexhi's serpentine form undulated with what might have been a shrug. "Treaties can be amended. The galaxy has evolved since those primitive agreements were signed. The Council has determined that humanity's expansion must be more carefully controlled." The words hung in the chamber like a death sentence. Sarah looked around at the faces, or what passed for faces, of the beings who had just casually sentenced her species to slow extinction. The Corvin Collective, with their predatory grins and hunger for destruction. The Crystal and Morthak dynasty, coldly calculating the profit margins of every decision. The hive-minded Zethlar swarm, seeing individual human lives as meaningless as single cells in their vast collective consciousness. "I need to contact Earth," Sarah said, her diplomatic training the only thing keeping her voice level. "My government needs to be informed of these developments." "Of course," Vexhi said, his tone magnanimous. "Though I'm afraid your communication privileges have been temporarily suspended pending a full review of humanity's compliance with Council regulations. For security purposes, you understand." The trap was complete. Humanity's colonies scattered and defenseless, their representatives isolated and silenced, their home system undoubtedly already surrounded by peacekeeping forces ready to prevent any hasty reactions to the news. Sarah nodded slowly, a plan already forming in her mind. "I understand perfectly, Counselor." What she understood was that diplomacy was dead. What she understood was that 3 centuries of human restraint, of following alien laws and accepting alien judgment, had been seen as weakness rather than wisdom. What she understood was that her species had been played for fools by beings who saw them as nothing more than useful animals to be managed and culled when convenient. As she was escorted from the chamber by Corvin guards, tall, predatory beings with razor-sharp claws and dead black eyes, Sarah caught sight of the memorial wall dedicated to the peaceful resolution of conflicts. Among the flowing alien scripts and exotic symbols, she spotted the small plaque dedicated to humanity's contributions to galactic peace. It seemed almost quaint now. The guards deposited her in what they called guest quarters, but which any human would recognize as a luxurious prison cell. The walls were transparent aluminum, offering a spectacular view of the Council Station's central hub and the massive fleet of warships surrounding it. Ships from every major species in the Council, their weapons powered down but ready. Sarah sat on the edge of the provided sleeping platform and stared out at those ships. She counted hull markings and weapons configurations with the eye of someone who had grown up reading military histories that the Council now banned. Humanity had given up their warships as part of the peace accords, but they hadn't given up the knowledge of how to fight them. Her diplomatic implant, a device that allowed instantaneous communication across the galaxy, had indeed been disabled. But Sarah Chen hadn't become humanity's chief ambassador through diplomacy alone. She had earned her position the hard way, through intelligence work in the years before the Accords, when humanity had still been preparing for the possibility that not all alien contact would be friendly. The implant's communication functions were disabled, but its data storage and emergency beacon remained active. Hidden within what appeared to be routine diplomatic files were detailed intelligence reports on every Council species' military capabilities, cultural weaknesses, and, most importantly, the complete historical records of humanity's military development. Records that the Council thought had been destroyed. Sarah activated the emergency beacon, a signal so faint and obscure that it would appear to be nothing more than background radiation to casual sensors. But, to anyone looking for it, anyone who remembered the old codes from before humanity had beaten their swords into plowshares, it would shine like a beacon. The message was simple: phase line crossed. All treaties void. Restrictions lifted. Authentication, broken arrow. Somewhere in the depths of space, automated monitoring stations that had been dark for 3 centuries began to wake up. Deep beneath Earth's surface, in bunkers that officially didn't exist, machines started to hum with power. And, in the homes and offices of retired military officers across human space, personal communicators that hadn't activated in decades suddenly came to life with a message that made old soldiers reach for weapons they thought they'd never need again. The Council had made their choice. They had decided that humanity's peaceful nature was weakness to be exploited rather than strength to be respected. They had chosen to see 3 centuries of cooperation as submission rather than genuine desire for peace. Now they would learn what humanity had been capable of all along. As Sarah watched the council fleet through her transparent walls, she allowed herself a cold smile. The beings out there had grown soft in their certainty of superiority. They had never had to fight for their worlds, never had to claw their way up from the bottom of the food chain, never had to unite their entire species just to survive their own planet's attempt to kill them. They were about to face an enemy that had been holding back for 300 years. An enemy that had voluntarily given up weapons capable of cracking planets and fleets that could darken star systems. An enemy that had traded their wolves' fangs for sheep's clothing and convinced themselves they liked the taste of grass. But wolves don't forget how to hunt. And humanity was about to remind the galaxy what apex predators look like when they stopped pretending to be prey. The emergency beacon continued its silent transmission, carrying its deadly message across the vast emptiness of space toward a blue world where 47 billion humans were about to learn that their children had been murdered, their future stolen, and their peaceful nature mistaken for weakness. The Council had crossed the line. Now they would burn for it. Admiral Marcus Kane stood in the command center of Luna Base 1, watching as holographic displays showed humanity's response to Sarah Chen's emergency beacon. 300 years of carefully maintained peace shattered in the span of 18 hours, and the galaxy was about to learn why humans had been so eager to put away their weapons. It hadn't been fear of others that drove humanity to peace, it had been fear of themselves. Report, Kane commanded, his weathered face illuminated by the glow of tactical displays showing ship movements across human space. Commander Lisa Rodriguez, her uniform bearing the Phoenix insignia of the reformed Terran Defense Force, stepped forward with a data tablet. All reserve fleets have reported in, sir. The Mjolnir squadron emerged from Neptune Station 40 minutes ago. The Valkyrie battle group cleared Mars orbital shipyards 15 minutes after that. Total combat vessels responding, 734 ships of the Wall, 2,300 escort vessels, and approximately 5,000 support craft. Kane nodded grimly. The numbers were impressive, but they didn't tell the full story. For 3 centuries, humanity had maintained the fiction that their warships had been decommissioned or converted to peaceful purposes. In reality, they had simply been moved to locations where the Council's monitoring systems couldn't detect them. Hidden bases in asteroid fields, hollowed-out moons, even camouflaged orbital platforms disguised as civilian infrastructure. The Council had been watching humanity's registered shipyards while ignoring the massive construction projects they'd dismissed as asteroid mining and deep space exploration. They'd seen humans building colony ships and dismissed the heavily reinforced hulls as necessary protection against cosmic radiation. They'd watched the installation of massive power cores and assumed they were for long-range exploration. They had never considered that those colony ships could be converted to warships in a matter of hours, or that humanity's mining equipment was sophisticated enough to hollow out asteroids and turn them into mobile fortresses. What about the Geneva survivors? Kane asked, though he already knew the answer would be painful. Rodriguez's expression darkened. Negative, sir. Complete sterilization. The Corvin cleansing fleet used plasma bombardment followed by atmospheric incineration. Nothing organic survived. Kane closed his eyes for a moment, seeing the faces of friends and colleagues who had been on New Geneva. People who had believed that humanity's future lay in peaceful coexistence with alien species. People who had volunteered to be pioneers in the galaxy's frontier, bringing human ingenuity and cooperation to distant worlds. They had died believing in a dream that the galaxy had never shared. Sir, interrupted Lieutenant Chan, no relation to the ambassador, but carrying the same determined expression that seemed to be a family trait. We're receiving priority communications from civilian authorities. The President wants to speak with you immediately. Kane nodded and activated the secure communication channel. President Maria Santos appeared as a full-scale hologram, her expression grave. Behind her, Kane could see the familiar surroundings of the Situation Room deep beneath the United Earth Government building. Admiral Kane, the President began without preamble, I need to know, how bad is this going to be? Kane looked at the tactical display showing humanity's mobilizing fleets, then back to his commander-in-chief. Madam President, the Council has made it clear that they see humanity as a species to be managed rather than an equal partner. New Geneva was not an isolated incident, it was a test. They wanted to see how we would react to the cold-blooded murder of our people. And, how are we reacting? Like humans, Madam President. Like the species that conquered Earth before we ever left the atmosphere. Kane gestured to the displays. We have enough firepower currently mobilizing to sterilize every council world twice over. The question is whether we're going to use it. President Santos was quiet for a long moment. Kane could see her weighing the implications, considering the consequences of the choice that lay before humanity. She had been elected on a platform of continued peaceful cooperation with the galaxy's other species. The decision she made in the next few minutes would define her legacy and, possibly, humanity's future. The families of the Geneva colonists, she said finally. What do they want? Kane understood the question. In a democracy, the peoples will matter, even especially when it came to matters of war and peace. I've been in contact with the colony families' representatives. Their position is unanimous. Which is? They want justice, Madam President. Not just for New Geneva, but for every slight, every restriction, every time the Council has treated humanity as a second-class species. They're tired of being the galaxy's servants. The President nodded slowly. And the military's assessment? We can win, Kane said simply. The Council species have grown comfortable with their technological superiority. They've forgotten that technology is only as effective as the beings using it. They've never faced an enemy that views warfare as a fundamental aspect of existence rather than an unfortunate necessity. On the tactical displays, more human ships were emerging from hidden bases and camouflaged stations. The Normandy Squadron, their ships disguised as asteroid mining platforms for over a century. The Thermopylae fleet, hidden in the Kuiper Belt and maintained by ice harvesting operations. The Gettysburg Battle Group, their massive dreadnoughts concealed within the rings of Saturn. Each fleet represented decades of careful planning, of preparing for a day humanity hoped would never come. Ships designed not just to fight, but to win against technologically superior opponents. Vessels built by a species that understood that superior technology meant nothing if you weren't willing to use it to its fullest extent. There's something else, Madam President, Kane continued. Our intelligence network has been monitoring Council communications. This isn't just about resource management or population control. The Corvin Collective has been pushing for what they call the final solution to the human problem for over 50 years. New Geneva was just the beginning. President Santos's expression hardened. Explain. They want to reduce humanity to a slave species. Keep enough of us alive to serve as manual labor and eliminate anyone with the education or capability to resist. The other Council species have been receptive to the idea. The President was silent for nearly a minute, and Kane could see the weight of leadership settling on her shoulders. When she spoke again, her voice carried the authority of someone who had just made a decision that would echo through history. Admiral Kane, I'm authorizing Operation Phoenix. Full military deployment with rules of engagement Alpha. Kane felt a chill run down his spine. Rules of engagement Alpha, total warfare with no restrictions on weapons or tactics. It meant humanity was done playing by the galaxy's civilized rules. Madam President, are you certain? Once we go down this path, Admiral, President Santos interrupted, her voice cutting through his concerns, 300,000 of our people are dead. Our ambassador is being held prisoner. The Council has made it clear that they see us as nothing more than useful animals to be culled when convenient. They've had 3 centuries to learn that humanity can be reasonable partners. Instead, they've chosen to see our restraint as weakness. She leaned forward, and Kane could see the steel that had made her the first person in Earth's history to be elected president by every single human colony world. They want to treat us like animals? Then, let's show them what happens when you corner a predator. The communication ended, leaving Kane alone with his staff and the weight of what was about to unfold. Around him, the command center buzzed with activity as centuries of carefully maintained peace gave way to the organized fury of human military might. "Commander Rodriguez," Kane called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had just been given permission to unleash hell. "Send the activation codes to all fleet commanders. Operation Phoenix is now active. All human military assets are to converge on Sol system for final briefing and deployment." "Yes, sir." "What about the civilian populations on human colonies?" Kane looked at the star chart showing the scattered human settlements across the galaxy, peaceful communities that had never imagined they might become targets in an interstellar war. "Emergency evacuation protocols. Get them back to Sol system or established safe zones. No human civilians are to remain in Council-controlled space." As the orders went out, Kane allowed himself a moment to consider what humanity was about to unleash. For 3 centuries, they had been the galaxy's farmers, engineers, doctors, and diplomats. They had willingly taken the role of helpful junior partners, contributing their skills and labor to the galactic community while keeping their claws sheathed. But, beneath the peaceful facade, humanity had never forgotten what they were. They were the species that had turned a death world into a garden through sheer bloody-minded determination. They were the descendants of beings who had looked at every other life form on their planet and decided that everything would serve them or die. They were the children of warriors who had fought wars so terrible that they had voluntarily given up warfare rather than risk destroying themselves. The Council was about to learn why humanity's homeworld had no other sapient species on it. As fleet after fleet of human warships emerged from their hiding places, their hulls bearing names like Stalingrad, Iwo Jima, Agincourt, and Thermopylae, Kane could almost feel the galaxy holding its breath. Somewhere out there, Council intelligence analysts were frantically trying to understand how a species they thought they had disarmed had produced a military force that dwarfed anything they had seen in recorded history. They would figure it out soon enough. They would learn that humans had never given up their weapons, they had simply hidden them so well that even they had started to believe their own peaceful rhetoric. The war was coming, and it would be like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Because humanity had spent 300 years learning how to be peaceful. Now they were going to remember how to be human. The Battle of Council Station lasted exactly 14 minutes and 37 seconds. It would be remembered as the moment the galaxy learned the difference between a species that had evolved to fight and species that had evolved to think about fighting. Admiral Kane watched from the bridge of the dreadnought Yorktown as humanity's revenge unfolded with mathematical precision. 700 ships of human design dropped out of hyperspace simultaneously, their targeting computers already locked onto every Council vessel in the system. What followed wasn't so much a battle as it was a demonstration of applied physics and controlled fury. The Council fleet had been expecting negotiation. Their ships were powered down, crews at minimal readiness, commanders probably debating the terms of humanity's surrender. They had 1,700 vessels stationed around the massive Council complex, representing the combined military might of 15 different species. On paper, they outgunned the human fleet by more than 2 to 1. On paper meant nothing to beings who had learned warfare on a world that actively tried to kill them every single day. "All ships report ready for engagement," Commander Rodriguez announced, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what was about to unfold. "Council fleet is hailing us, sir." Kane nodded. "Put them through." The viewscreen flickered to life, revealing the serpentine form of Admiral Vextai, his scaled features arranged in what might have been confidence but looked more like barely controlled panic. Behind him, Kane could see the Council Station's command center in chaos, alien crew members frantically attempting to bring weapons online and coordinate a response to the human fleet's sudden appearance. "Admiral Kane," Vextai began, his forked tongue flicking nervously, "surely we can discuss this rationally. The incident at New Geneva was regrettable, but hardly worth regrettable," Kane repeated, his voice cold enough to freeze helium. 300,000 human beings murdered in their homes, and you call it regrettable? "Admiral, please. We can reach an accommodation. The Council is prepared to offer reparations, perhaps even limited self-governance for human colonies. The time for talking is over," Kane interrupted. In the background, he could hear the subtle hum of the Yorktown's main guns charging to full power. Around the fleet, hundreds of other human warships were doing the same, their weapon systems coming online with the quiet efficiency of predators preparing to feed. You had 3 centuries to treat humanity as equals. Instead, you chose to see us as servants. You mistook our desire for peace as inability to wage war. Vexed eyes serpentine form coiled tighter around his command perch. Admiral, you cannot possibly believe you can defeat the combined might of the Council fleet. We outnumber you significantly, and our technology, your technology, Kane said quietly, assumes that your enemies will fight by your rules. The communication cut off, and Kane turned to his weapons officer. Lieutenant Morrison, you may fire when ready. What happened next would be studied in military academies for centuries to come. The human fleet didn't engage in the traditional pattern of maneuvering, forming battle lines, and trading volleys that characterized most galactic warfare. Instead, they did something that no Council species had ever considered: they fought like humans. The first wave of human ships drove straight into the heart of the Council formation, their heavily armored hulls shrugging off defensive fire while their own weapons systems locked onto specific target points on enemy vessels. Not the traditional targeting of weapons and engines, but precise strikes designed to cause maximum damage to alien physiology. The Corvin ships, designed for their species' silicon-based biology, found their atmospheric systems flooded with oxygen-nitrogen mixtures that were toxic to their crews. Morthak vessels, dependent on crystalline resonance for their command systems, discovered their control networks disrupted by precisely tuned sonic weapons. Zephyr Hive ships watched in horror as targeted electromagnetic pulses severed the psychic links that connected their crews to their collective consciousness. Humans had spent 3 centuries as junior partners in galactic civilization, learning about every species' biological and technological weaknesses. They had filed that information away as the natural curiosity of a species that loved to understand how things worked. The Council was now discovering that humans also loved to understand how things broke. Council formation is collapsing, Rodriguez reported, her voice carrying a note of professional satisfaction. Enemy casualties at 67% and rising. Our losses are minimal: 3 ships with minor damage, no casualties reported. Kane nodded, watching as the Corvin cleansing fleet, the same ships that had murdered the colonists of New Geneva, found themselves surrounded by human vessels whose crews had personal reasons for revenge. The Corvins were discovering that humans had a concept called proportional response, but they also had a concept called justice. The human ships assigned to engage the cleansing fleet weren't just destroying their targets, they were systematically disabling them, leaving the crews alive but helpless. There would be trials. There would be accountability. And there would be a very public demonstration of what happened to beings who mistook human mercy for human weakness. Admiral, called out the communications officer, we're receiving surrender signals from multiple Council vessels. Accepted, Kane replied immediately. All ships offering surrender are to be taken intact. Crews will be processed as prisoners of war according to the Terran military code. He paused, his expression hardening. With one exception. Any vessel that participated in the New Geneva attack is to be disabled and boarded. Those crews will be transported back to Sol System for trial. As the battle wound down, Kane allowed himself to survey the tactical display showing the systematic destruction of a fleet that had ruled the galaxy for over 1,000 years. It hadn't been a battle so much as a lesson in applied violence, taught by a species that had learned warfare in the most unforgiving classroom in the known universe. The survivors would carry word back to their home systems: humanity was no longer asking for a place at the table. They were taking it. Sir, Rodriguez called out, the Council station is requesting permission to evacuate non-combatant personnel. Kane considered this. The massive station housed not just military command facilities but also diplomatic quarters, civilian research centers, and cultural exchange programs. There were beings there who had genuinely tried to bridge the gap between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. Permission granted, he said finally. But I want Ambassador Chen recovered first. And I want a full accounting of everyone who voted for Emergency Resolution 4471. As human boarding parties began the process of securing the Council station, Kane reflected on the magnitude of what had just occurred. In less than 15 minutes, humanity had shattered the military power that had controlled the galaxy for millennia. But, more importantly, they had sent a message that would echo across every inhabited system: the age of council dominance was over. The aftermath was swift and brutal in its efficiency. Within 6 hours, human fleets had emerged from hyperspace at every major council world simultaneously. Not to destroy them, humans had learned the difference between justice and genocide, but to deliver an ultimatum that was backed by the proven capability to enforce it. The terms were simple: complete dissolution of the Galactic Council as a governing body, full autonomy for all species within their own systems, and the establishment of a new galactic confederation based on genuine equality rather than the dominance of a self-appointed elite. Most importantly, there would be reparations. Not just for New Geneva, but for 3 centuries of treating humanity as second-class citizens in their own galaxy. The response was predictable. Some species, particularly the smaller ones who had chafed under council dominance for centuries, welcomed humanity's ultimatum with relief. Others, like the Morthak dynasty and the Zephyr swarm, attempted to organize resistance. They lasted approximately as long as it took human intelligence services to identify their home system's critical infrastructure and human special forces to demonstrate their ability to reach any target, anywhere, at any time. The Morthak learned this lesson when their primary crystal resonance arrays began experiencing catastrophic failures that somehow only affected military installations. The Zephyr discovered it when key nodes in their psychic network started broadcasting human music at volumes that disrupted their collective consciousness. Within a month, every major power in the galaxy had accepted humanity's terms. The alternative was to face a species that had spent 300 years learning about their weaknesses while hiding the true extent of their own strengths. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood once again in the great hall of what had been the council chamber, but the scene was dramatically different now. Instead of alien beings sitting in judgment of humanity's right to exist, representatives from dozens of species sat as equals, working together to draft the charter for the new Galactic Confederation. The memorial wall had been expanded. Alongside the plaques celebrating peaceful resolution of conflicts, there was now a new section dedicated to the victims of council oppression. At its center was a simple black granite plaque bearing the names of every human who had died at New Geneva, along with a single line of text: "They died believing in peace. We lived to ensure their sacrifice was not in vain." But the most significant change was in the attitudes of the galaxy's species toward humanity. The casual dismissal had been replaced by something approaching respect. The condescension had given way to careful diplomacy. And the assumption that humans could be safely ignored had been thoroughly and permanently corrected. Kane found himself thinking about the price of peace as he watched the new Confederation's first session. Humanity had achieved everything they had wanted for 3 centuries: genuine equality, respect for their rights, and recognition as full partners in galactic civilization. The cost had been the revelation that they were capable of destroying that civilization if necessary. Admiral Rodriguez approached with a data pad, interrupting his thoughts. "Final casualty reports from all operations." Kane took the pad, scanning the numbers with professional interest. Human losses had been remarkably light, fewer than 2,000 casualties across all theaters of operation. Council losses were more significant, but far lower than they could have been if humanity had chosen conquest over justice. "What's our fleet status?" he asked. "All major vessels operational and ready for deployment. The shipyards are requesting guidance on new construction priorities." Kane nodded thoughtfully. Humanity now found itself in the position of being the galaxy's dominant military power, but they had no interest in replacing the Council's tyranny with their own. The challenge now was maintaining enough strength to deter future aggression while avoiding the corruption that had ultimately destroyed the Council. "Tell the shipyards to focus on defensive platforms and rapid response vessels," he decided. "We're not building an empire, we're building a deterrent." As he watched the former Council species working alongside human representatives to draft laws and treaties based on actual equality, Kane allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. Perhaps the galaxy could learn to coexist without one species dominating all others. Perhaps the dream of genuine peace that had motivated humanity for 3 centuries could finally be realized. But, in the deepest vaults beneath Luna Base 1, the weapons that had ended the Council's reign remained ready for activation. Because humanity had learned a hard lesson about the nature of galactic politics. Sometimes the only way to achieve peace was to be so terrifyingly capable of war that no one dared to test your resolve. The Council had crossed the line, and humanity had answered with fire. Now, in the ashes of the old order, something new was being born. Something based not on the dominance of the strong over the weak, but on the understanding that every species, no matter how peaceful, had the right to defend itself and the capability to do so. The galaxy had learned to respect humanity. And humanity had learned that sometimes, the greatest act of mercy was ensuring that everyone understood the consequences of testing your patience. The war was over. The peace would endure. Because now everyone knew what happened when humanity stopped talking and started fighting.